Good day, dear students. Welcome to our subject Counseling and Learner Support 2. This is a module which is done by students who are doing B.Ed Honors and B.Ed. And this subject content will lead us to the upcoming 3 examinations. My name is Ina Simpson. My contact number is 081-2457-456. My email address inasimpson@gmail.com. Welcome to the Counseling and Learner Support subject content. I am your tutor and tutor marker. I will be responsible to mark your assignments as well as examination. And I wish you all to be hardworking, dedicated, and self-driven students. There should be nobody pushing you to do your work. You must be your own principal of your own study. This presentation will take us through the subject content as well as how to approach some questions. The aim of the module is to sensitize the teacher trainees to the psychological needs of learners. It helps us to develop the guidance, their guidance and counseling and skills, counseling theories, explain how features of modern life influence psychological well-being. It also implements the approaches in individual as well as group counseling, the core function of the counseling process and their relevant implementing skills and techniques. It also looks at the principles and levels of crisis interventions. The counseling interventions are for underachievers and for social issues, the features of career counseling, the upper primary and secondary learner support. These basically are the units we are going to cover in our module. A final pass mark, this is how the module is going, or the subject is going to be assessed. A final pass mark of 50% is required, calculated by 60 of the examination and 40 of the semester or continuous assessment. And when we are talking of continuous assessment, we are talking of assignments. A sub-minimum of 50% must be attained in the examination. So our examination is out of 120. You are expected at least to score minimum 60 marks out of 120. That will become your 50% from the examination, added to the marks you get in the assignment. The duration of the question paper is 2 hours 30 minutes. As I said earlier, that the question is out of 120. You will have open-ended questions that will not only ask you to memorize or to say what you have memorized, but also to answer your questions with practical knowledge. And the question paper will have spaces where you will have to write your answers, and you are required to write neatly. And in some cases previously, some students received a module and Unit 8 was not part of the module. I do not know if you happen to find yourself in that situation, please make sure that you visit IOL office so that you have it, or firstly you can also check on the portal, because it was uploaded as an attachment, that you can have it. And if you can't find it, speak to the course coordinator so that it's made available to you. Let us go through the units to see what it has for us. Unit 1, Theories and Tools in Psychology. This unit is presenting different theories. Theories refers to a system of ideas intended to explain something that, based on the general principles independent of the thing to be explained. Let us now look at the following behaviors. Let us look at the following theories. We have behavior approaches. When we talk of behavior approaches, we are talking of human behavior, which is learned, and it can be unlearned. And new behaviors can also be learned in its place. It's also concerned primarily with the observable and measurable aspects of human behavior. Therefore, unacceptable behavior can be unlearned. It is a continuous process. You learn and you unlearn. Different approaches continues in counseling. The Marxist theory, this theory offers two sets of ideas, a description of how society operates and why history has unfolded, and also explain the nature of capitalism. We are looking at system theory. It is a network of interrelated relationships. A system is thus a functional whole consisting of components or subsystems where the organizations of the component as a whole change the characteristics of the individual components. A system thinker studies relationships. And then we are looking at culture refers to norms, beliefs, values, and the way of life for a complete society, patterns of human actions and association. General characteristics, validity, features, and limitations of theory, biopsychosocial theory, which perceives people as a holistic being. We are looking at a person as a whole. And then we have the science of pathology. Assist the counselor when assessing the client, and also in making an informed referral to other professionals. It also gives us an idea to understand and explain the characteristics of psychopathology in Africa, and to see how much science of psychopathology connected to counseling. When we are looking at counseling with the science of pathology, we look at what is it that a client has, and in order for us to make a strong referral of what assistance from other professionals is. We are looking at Unit 2, which is features of modern life and how they influence psychological well-being. Ecological system model has been developed by an American psychologist, the Uri Bronfenbrenner. He divided the environment into 5 different levels. In the 5 different levels, we have micro, forms innermost intimate circle. This is the circle where a child is in relation or interacting with the parents, siblings, extended families, and the child learns from them. We have the meso, where 2 or more microsystems interact, affect the child directly, contains the relationship between microsystem. Then we are also looking at the ecosystem. It involves the linkage between 2 systems. At least one of the system does not directly involve the child. For example, an environment in which an individual is not involved, which is external to his or her experience. For example, the parent's work. Should anything happen at the parent's work, for example, the parent is retrenched, that is going to affect the child. Of course, it's not directly, but through the parent who is supposed to look after the child. And then we are looking at macro system or macro level, consists of cultural patterns like values, beliefs, customs, and economic and social system, the customs and cultural environment in which the child resides. The child has to belong to a certain culture. There are customs to be followed for a child, by a child and any other person. And then we have chronos system in the outer circle, and which sometimes individual does not realize the impact of influence they experience from this system. It is made up of the environmental events and transition that occur throughout a child's life, including historical event, things in the environment, and policies. That is now the very outer, the far end circle, which is also influence the child, though not direct. Then we are looking at students are expected to understand the 5 ecological systems, know them in the correct order, and what each system entails. It has been noticed from the previous examination that most students never understood what each system meant or mean besides mentioning them. It's not good enough to mention the levels only or the systems, but then understand how a child develops when the child is within that system. Intervention is basically taken to improve the situation. Here follow different areas of intervention, and then we are talking of the primary, secondary, and tertiary. It is important to know that the level of referral are to inform you when to provide assistance to learners and their parents. That is now the intervention. And then with the intervention as it is explained or is mentioned, we have the primary intervention. This refers to specifically obtain help in a person's immediate environment or vicinity. And then the secondary intervention is to offer inpatient and outpatient care. For example, if we are to talk about patients, they might decide that it is necessary to transfer where there is highly specialized care given. And then we are looking at the tertiary. This has to do with the specialized areas. So in terms of health, we are looking at the specialists, doctors. And then we are looking at if you are to demonstrate the merit of primary, secondary, and tertiary intervention in problems facing children under your care, to answer this question, there is need to understand the 3 types of intervention well and what are they meant for. Then we are moving to Unit 3, individual and group counseling approaches. There are different practitioners in the field of counseling: clinical and counseling, educational, industrial, and registered counselors. Get to know the difference and their functions. If you are talking of educational psychologist, who are you talking about? And then it is not enough to mention only. Look at the question demand to avoid losing marks. Features of group counseling and the behavior and various approaches which could be used. When we are looking at features, we are looking at the characteristics of a group counseling. It's very important that we also enrich our vocabulary so that we understand the questions better. Group counseling differs from individual counseling. Further reading on page 76 of the study guide could be of assistance in this regard. And you are also not restricted to the guide you have, the study guide you have. You can also look up in other resources, as long as the resources are talking about the group counseling. How is it different from individual counseling? We are looking at Unit 4, core functions of the counseling process and their relevance, implementing skills and or techniques. Two theorists, Carley and Bond, used the interaction skills model in counseling on how to guide learners through 3 stages. The 3 core functions of the counseling process. The first phase is relationship building. For you to carry out a counseling process, you should be able to first build a relationship. What do they say in building a relationship? Spending time with the client to get to know him or her. Rapport is established to put client at ease and also to convey understanding and empathy. So far, you establish the relationship, and then the client become at ease, so the client then will be able to share whatever he or she has. And then it also creates room for a counselor to put yourself in the shoes of the client. Having good verbal and non-verbal communication skills can help the counselor to convey empathy. When how you communicate, whether it is body language or whether it is how you talk to the client, it will make the client to be open and share whatever the person or the client want to share with the counselor. We have the acronym SOLAR, that is now actively listening. You should be able to listen. That refers to listening accurately. Empathy listening, that refers to clients' experience, thoughts, and patterns of thinking. The other factors that have a great influence on relationship resistance and reluctant when clients do not want to be part of the session. And then we are looking at negotiating the relationship boundaries and experience, expectations, norms, mutual respect and acceptance are established earlier in therapy, and also factors that related services and confidentiality. This also involved ethical responsibility if information has to be divulged to the third party. So when we are talking of the third party, if the information need to be released, remember the ethical is that all what you discuss with your client should be confidential. But then we get to a point where you need to safeguard the client, then you need to release the information to the next person who is now in the third party, who is now called the third party. So it's very important that we keep that in mind. And then we have the assessing or understanding the problem. The problem situation is explored, attempts are made, and goals are set to address the situation. This is now the second process, the second function core of the counseling process. And then counselors should listen for hidden meanings and emotions to help clients define and realize what is really happening. And then there could be multiple problems. Then counselor need to advise the client to prioritize the problems in case there are different problems that within what is being said as they talk of the hidden problems. But then it's your duty to see to it that your client has been assisted. And then it helps the counselor to look at how the problem affects the client's life. Clients need to imagine realistic futures. So you speak to your client, you need to make the client aware of how to go about the problem. But it's not your duty to say you will solve the problem. Give the idea to your client so that the client see to it that this is how I can solve the problem. Specific goals must be set. Strategies to achieve the goals must be thought of and should correlate with resources available to the client. And then strategies must be put into action, into an action plan. So when you find the strategies, then you know the resources, then it should be put in the action. How are you going to carry it out? That is, in the end, we are looking at how the problem can be solved. Addressing, number 3, addressing the problem. Looking at ways of addressing the problem, goals and plans must be or should be implemented to facilitate changes and improvement in psychological well-being. And then we have the relationship in maintaining. Counselor facilitates an implementation of strategies to meet the goals. Counselor take the listener's role when strategies are difficult for the client to implement. After strategies implemented successfully, the counselor relationship is terminated. If you are not able to continue with the client, you will find it difficult that you now need to refer the client to someone else. So then that can be done. In the past examination, students experienced a challenge regarding core functions of the counseling process. Answers were mixed up. It was also an indication that students did not master the content before they attempt the question. Therefore, there's need to understand the content in full. It's not enough to read and without comprehending the question or the content. Then we have Unit 5, which is talking about crisis intervention, principle levels and ethics. Meaning of crisis: refer to a dangerous situation that can cause serious psychological pathology by overwhelming the individual. It is also an opportunity that forces an individual to take some sort of action. Crisis can cause discomfort that form anxiety, that force people to change and grow. Crisis has complicated effects. The dangerous situation has complicated effects or complications effects. When faced a challenge, a person is forced to make some sort of decision or choice. Experiencing crisis is an universality. Since all of us experience some sort of crisis and idiosyncrasy, because no one reacts to the same crisis in the same way or in the same manner, crises lead to positive or negative outcomes for the individual. When complications appears or are there, it only tells us that each one of us go through a problem or a dangerous situation, and when the situation comes, it does not mean that all of us will face it the same way. We face it in different ways. Symptoms experienced during crisis. Different symptoms can experience, such as physical or bodily harm, gastrointestinal, muscle tension and difficulties sleeping, sweating, heart palpitations, and shortness of breath. Those are the symptoms which can be under physical or bodily symptoms. Then we have psychological and emotional. That has to do with the thinking. It has to do with the feelings. Moderate levels of depression, hypersensitivity, dependence on parents, low self-esteem, hostility, frustration, anxiety, and acute grief. Those are the feelings that we may go through. And then cognitive, memory deficits, illogical and irrational thinking, poor problem solving abilities, and suicidal ideations. That has to do with thinking now. And then we are looking at the behavior, decrease in academic performance at school, suicide and homicide, violent and aggressive behaviors are found in children and adults. So each area has its own experience, its own symptoms. And then we are looking at the stage of crisis. With the stages of crisis, they are in this order: initial rise in tension, which can be emotional, difficult to handle. And number 2, the psychological and physiological response action. If resolved, the crisis situation fail, then it progress to feelings of depression. 3, the coping mechanism, mobilizing to look for ways of addressing the problem. Number 4, the acute age stages of disorganization. The person develop depression and start to experience feelings of deorganization. Counselor can assist with the coping process when the client has obtained resources and skills to address the problem. If you understand what the client is going through, you should be able to assist. 4 categories of type of crisis: developmental, disruption or changes in a person's growth and normal developmental crisis. Situational, arise suddenly and cannot be controlled. Those are like rape, car accident, and so on. Existential, make a person feel like a failure among others. And exosystemic crisis occurs due to natural like tsunamis or human caused like war. And then crisis intervention is an immediate and short-term psychological care aimed at assisting individuals in a crisis situation. Principles underlying crisis interventions: these are the short-term process. You take over, focus, reduction, reducing the tension, anxiety, and discomfort, source, functioning, and resources. So when we look at principles which underlying the crisis intervention, we need to know that these are the factors that we need to bring in. Otherwise, there would be no principles at all. And then we are looking at levels of crisis. Multiple levels are identified. The psychological, this addressing feelings, thoughts, and dysfunctional behavior. Counselor confronts cognitive distortions and illogical thoughts. Social, clients need a stable, dependable social network. And then the spiritual levels, it makes a person to think about your own life. So with the level of crisis intervention, we have psychological, social, and spiritual. And then we are looking at the ethical principle in counseling, which guide us not to do certain things. You need to carry out the conversation in confidentiality. You inform the consent, record keeping. You need to have a dual relationship, you and your client. The sexual contact and competencies. These principles need to be explained in order to have a good understanding. As you are communicating with your client, the client should be able to know that whatever you discuss, it should end there between the two of you. And you also need to, the client also need to know that a consent is taken, so that whenever information has to be talked about, you first have to ask for permission from the client, and then you need to keep a record for that. And then we have the the areas noticed previous from the previous exam, it's very important to study the unit from the introduction in order to understand all aspects included. That's very important. Definition of crisis was not understood by the majority of the previous students as they attempt to answer the question. This was one of the question that was in the previous exam. This is only brought to you so that you know that when you read or when you study, you must be able to at least understand the meaning of or the definition of aspects that are being talked about. Stages of crisis, categories, levels of crisis, interventions, and ethical principles. It has been noticed that students just read but never understood the work. Again, for the stages of crisis, categories, levels of crisis, intervention, and ethical, it was just a matter of reading and without understanding what exactly was it. And then when a questioner asks student answer anything related to crisis without fully understood the question, at times students 4 stages of crisis are placed at levels of crisis. So it was done vice versa. Avoid such attempts as it will cause the loss of marks. Then Unit 6, Counselling Intervention for Underachievement and Social Issues. Underachievement refers to poor or low school performance that does not correlate to a learner's intellectual ability and potential. When you are underachiever, then it means your school performance has gone down. Types of underachiever, different underachiever, we have got gifted, coasting, anxiety, defiant, wheeler, dealer, identity searching, and sad depression. Then we have the general characteristics of people who are underachiever. What do we learn from people who are underachiever, or how do we come to terms that to understand that this is an underachiever learner? So these are characteristics that can be found in learners who do not achieve according to their potential. That is now a lack of motivation, poor study habits, low self-esteem, low educational aspirations, struggle to adjust, and many others. Factors that commonly influence underachiever. For a person to be called underachiever, then it means that in the person's life there could be some hindrance, and those could be from the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual that could cause the underachieving. Counseling interventions for junior and secondary underachievers, and then we are looking at interventions for rape victims, teenager pregnancy, possible suicide cases, alcohol and drug abuse, domestic violence, and HIV and AIDS. So we have now to read more on the interventions of those cases I just mentioned. There is need to read more around these types of victims in order to understand them, especially the causes and what can be done to assist victims. Unit 7, Counseling, Career Counseling. Changing world of work. The work of the career counselor, with the assistance of assessments on interests, aptitude, personality traits, and an exploration of possible inclinations, can provide guidance with respect to fit individuals. World of work differs from previous generations. There are reasons for rapidly changing world of work. That is now knowledge of explosion, globalization, liberalization of society, organizational structures, and management style. So the world we live in today has changed. So you need to move as what is required, not what people did 10 years ago, what you can do in the field of study, no. And employability skills and values. Life skills assist individuals to be in state of preparedness of any change. To achieve this, individuals requires certain skills such as career adaptation, positive uncertainty, managing change, lifelong learning, and personal agencies. All these are required to be done by a life skills teacher. They are the one to see to it that for a learner to take up this career, this is what you need to know and this is what you need to understand. The important meaning of work. There are several meanings of work. Some of the important meanings of work include social, economic, political, ethical, and moral. It is very important for students to understand the meaning of different aspects during this unit. It has been noticed that students provide answers which are mixed up because they do not understand. At times, answers for changing of world of work are placed under employability, skills, and values. There must be a difference between the two. Let us make it a point to know the content and do not memorize the work. This is why such mistakes happen if you do not understand. Then we move to Unit 8, Features of Senior Primary and Secondary Learner Support. Learning process. Quality teaching is based upon understanding of the learning process, such as education need to produce learners who are healthy, well-nourished, and ready to participate in learning, support in learning by their families and communities, environments that are healthy, safe, protective, and gender sensitivity, content that is reflected in relevant curricula and materials for basic skills. We are looking at learning process. For teaching to take place or for quality teaching to take place, all this has to be involved and all this have to be noticed and practiced. How teachers should be trained to use learner-centered teaching approach is well-managed classroom. In well-managed classroom, for a teacher to keep a class in order, you need to know at least what learner-centered is. We are moving away from autocratic and we are moving into democratic, where every person in the classroom is a stakeholder of that, what is happening in the class. It's no longer a teacher who is only giving the ideas, but learners are also welcome to share their ideas. And then we have skillful assessment to facilitate learning and outcomes that encompasses knowledge, skills, and attitudes. We are looking at skillful assessment. These are the examination, the test, the whatever activities they have to do for learning to take place. Features of learning process, what are they? Motivation of learning, motivation to learning, which are intrinsic and extrinsic, how and when it could be applied based on the classroom climate. So, and then we are looking at the common possible barriers that has effect on learning and how to address them. Some learning are influenced by what is not correct or which is done in the classroom, and then we are looking at these possible barriers can affect the learning to take place and how can they be addressed. So then it's very important to identify what are those barriers and what can you do about them. And then we have the features of emotional support by the teacher, And then we look at the features of cognitive academic support for learners, feedback to learners about their learning, and we clarify how to advise parents in which manner they should support children's learning at home. All these are features of learning to take place. So for learning to take place, then we need to do all this. And then we are looking at the backlog of the environmental. What is in the environment that is possibly stopping the learner to learn? And we clarified the advice, this was already mentioned, and features of democratic classroom discipline that would support learning rather than punishing the learners. So we are looking at the democratic class where everyone has a say. Everybody is able to say something, not only the teacher who can say anything all the time. Inductive or indirect teaching, learning, and homework. So how can we assist so that these learners do their homework? And abusing drugs, effects of drug abuse and how to address them. Again, abusing of substances is also part of bringing down their education, and then we need to find ways how to address them. That was information for Unit 8, and we quickly look at common mistakes done with the previous or from the previous examination. Students are expected to write neatly and legibly. Students should take spelling into consideration. There are a lot of mistakes being done. Someone is writing a word counseling instead of the S which is in there. The person replaces S with a C, and many other words. Questions misinterpreted. In some cases, questions are answered with very limited answers, which brings down the final score. You have a question of 15 marks or 10 marks, then someone decides to write only 2 points. Definitely there is no way these marks will be multiplied. Students should be fully prepared to assignment as well as examination, know the subject content to avoid guessing the answers or to provide any information of what have been studied, though not answering the question demand. Because it happens that if a person run out of ideas, anything that is related to, if it is talking about learner support, then even if it is not practically the question, then the person end up writing. For you to give a full page of irrelevant answers does not qualify you to have any mark. You are free to call me from Monday to Thursdays at 2:30 to 8 o'clock in the evening, and then Saturday, Sundays the same time, 1 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening. And I wish you well in your studies. Good luck.